Welcome to the fourth session, I think, of Questioning the Death Penalty, sponsored by the Prison Reform Task Force. And we're thrilled that tonight we have the actual Sister Helen Prejean with us, and we're going to be able to listen to her, and we're excited about that. One thing I need to tell you is that our sessions are being recorded. So if you have friends and relatives who would like to catch up with us, the recordings are at dscumc.org/prison reform. There's a lot of information that I'm sure you can look up about Sister Helen, and so I don't want to use her time to cover that. But she has books out that I was only coming into this only familiar with Dead Man Walking, and I see that she has a couple of other books out, so I'm excited to go get those and read them. She has one called The Death of Innocence that has to do with people who are innocent and they're still receiving the death penalty. So Sister Helen got into this as being a spiritual advisor to death row inmates, starting with Patrick Sonnier, I think I'm saying that right. And she has continued that, and that really gets to you when you work with these folks, because you do start to understand them and feel their humanity, which is important. Sister Helen was joined the Sisters of St. Joseph when she was 18. So she's been there a long time and has taught high school and religious education in New Orleans, and is now, as you know, an author and a spiritual advisor, and she wears many hats, and they're all wonderful. Let me ask our chair, Paul Bullis, to open us with prayer.
Loving and merciful God, we come together again this evening as we continue our journey where we are challenged by the death penalty and challenged about how to respond. We are grateful that our guide along that journey, Sister Helen Prejean, is with us this evening to continue to challenge and inspire us. Oh God, we ask that you be with Sister Helen as she speaks, and that you be with each of us as we hear her, so that we may be able to honor all life as you would have us do. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay.
All right.
Yay.
Take it away. I am very happy to be with you. I think one of my favorite groups to be with are people of faith who are awakening to the gospel of Jesus as more than just simply being charitable to the people around us and praying for the people of the world, but engaged in the issues of justice and to work for systemic change, to change society, to help transform it. That is the work of the Holy Spirit in us. We are made in God's image. We do have a divine spark in us, a divine spark and an infinite capacity for truth. We can never know enough truth. We always are going to be seeking for truth. We always are going to be going deeper into what truth is and what things mean and to gain understanding. And we have an infinite capacity not to have boundaries around our love and to love. And of course, the Jesus challenge for love is to go past all the boundaries that our society puts around people, and that separates us. It makes us afraid of people, that makes us avoid people. And that even through our lifestyles, because most of us have done well economically, or at least reasonably, is that we live in communities where we're separated from really poor people. And prisons are places where the poorest of the poor are, not just because they're in prison, but because they are the most despised, the most hated, the most misunderstood, and you put Jesus on this earth, and Jesus visits Phoenix and he visits Arizona. He's not going to visit the governor and he's not going to visit the mayor. And he is going to make his way into the prison. There's a saying in Latin America, what the eye doesn't see, the heart can't feel. And we have to see, we have to encounter. There's a big, big thing with Pope Francis. I mean, for believers, the place for believers is to be a field hospital out there close to where the wounded are, not separated from, but close to them, which means we got a journey to make. We have a pilgrimage to make, not just of the heart, but a physical one, to go to be with and to be near those who are suffering. So let me tell you a little bit about my story and how I awakened. The whole story of how I woke up finally that the gospel was about justice, and it wasn't simply about being a good nun, being charitable, praying for people, not being mean to kids and slapping them with rulers and being a mean nun, but was awakening to the cry of the poor and people in my own city, New Orleans. I lived out in the suburbs. And there's one other thing that we have to be deeply aware of in our own journey of conversion, and it is white privilege. It doesn't mean that we necessarily go around with a snooty attitude and we're better than Black people or anything like that. White privilege simply means, simply because of the fact that we are white, we never have to worry when we walk in a room that people are going to look at us funny. Black people deal with the color of their skin every day of their lives. And in every one of our systems, from getting housing to getting a job to going to prison to not getting the COVID, to you name every single system, healthcare, every system, simply because they are Black, they are carrying on their shoulders and in the color of their skin, the legacy of slavery. We built this country on slaves, our own families and our fathers and our mothers. My father grew up poor on a plantation, but he was white. He had to drop out of school to support his family, but he was white. And he moved off the plantation and he went to Baton Rouge and he went to school and he became a lawyer and he became successful in Baton Rouge. But he was white. He didn't have his color holding him back at every step. And our first job is a conversion of understanding just how deep the legacy of slavery, the stigma of being Black, and then have generation after generation after generation of poverty and lack of education. And then we say, listen how funny those Black people talk, or Native Americans in Arizona. Our family lived there for 2 years because my little brother had asthma. And looking back now, used to call Native American women squaws. Oh, those Indians are so lazy. But who personally was friends with anyone who was a Native American? And so that's where we have to put a huge amount of social energy, is getting out of, our little lagoons, to get in there to be in the presence, because that is where God works with us. And we don't so much go to pour our wonderful selves out on people who are suffering, but it is because we need their presence. And that's what happened to me. In this book, in about awakening to justice, when I did awaken, I moved out of the suburbs where I'd lived in New Orleans and taught and was the director of religious ed in a parish. And I moved into the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans among African-American people who had been my servants when I grew up in the Deep South in Baton Rouge during the Jim Crow days. Never questioned Jim Crow. Never questioned that even in Sacred Heart Church, Black people had to sit in a place by themselves, and Black kids couldn't receive their first Holy Communion with us white kids. Never questioned it. Not because I was bad, and not because I had a bad mom and daddy. Culture gives us eyes And culture gives us ears. Honey, this is the way, it's better this way for the races to be separate. That's what culture does. And faith is that perspective. Faith is seeing through things and being able, questioning is the first part of faith. Why is this? What is about this? That leads to understanding. So River of Fire takes you into awakening to poor people in right in my own backyard, going and living among them. So they became my teachers. It's the first time I ever heard the word white privilege. We did this workshop called Undoing Racism. That racism is woven into every system in America. It's linguistics. It's white. Look it up in the dictionary. Snow White, pure, black, blackball, blacklist, black, bad, white. In the language, and even the way we speak. And it's in the banking, and it's in the real estate. And we've even had laws in the country. The Supreme Court has one of the biggest racist histories, our Supreme Court, upholding racist things, still upholding racist. They had a chance in the McCluskey decision. Those decisions are in this book, The Death of Innocence, clearly to show the pattern that the death penalty is not equally applied at all, not equal protection under the laws at all. Overwhelmingly, it's when white people are killed that the death penalty is sought. 8 out of every 10 people sitting on your Arizona death row, like on my Louisiana death row, and all across this nation, 8 out of 10, it's because they killed a white person. And people of color are 50% of the homicide victims. But here, and I might as well get into it right now, of why the death penalty has been broken from the beginning and the way the Supreme Court set it up. Just to get back, that McCluskey decision in the 80s, the Supreme Court was given the very clear pattern. Hey, look, here's how it really comes down. Who gets it, who doesn't, and the difference that race made. And they had a chance to find the death penalty unconstitutional in its practice because of race, and they did not do it. Later, 2 of the Supreme Court justices, Powell and one other one, Blackmun, I think, later was asked what they regretted the most. You got these 9 individuals, most of them went to prep schools, and they are elite people with elite experiences making these decisions, and they passed up their chance to do that. But let me tell you why. From the beginning, it was ill-conceived and it was broken. 1972, in the Furman decision, the Supreme Court of the United States overturned the death penalty, saying it was unconstitutional because it was cruelly and unusually applied. It was arbitrary and it was capricious. 4 years later, they put the death penalty back. And they claimed that they were going to fix the arbitrariness and the capriciousness. So what they did was they set as a criteria that it was only going to be applied for the worst of the worst murders. Now get this. These are just human beings making these decisions and setting this criterion. Only the worst of the worst. Not your ordinary murders, not your garden variety murders. Only the worst of the worst. And who knows what that means? Well, you kill my mother. I'm so sorry your mother got killed, but you see, it wasn't during a felony. They didn't fit the aggravating circumstances you gotta have around the murder. Didn't happen that you were a convenience store owner and somebody comes in to rob you, robbery, felony, had to be accompanied by a felony. Your mother was murdered, but she wasn't raped. She was just murdered. We have no way to handle this, and we never have from the beginning. And we really see its brokenness. You now have 187 wrongfully convicted people that were lucky enough to get off a death row. Some came within hours of almost being executed. So the criteria was off, and coupled in the worst possible way that it's going to be up to the discretion of prosecutors to seek death or not. Why do you now have an attorney general who has decided He is going to get everybody executed off death row before he leaves office and runs for Congress. How did he decide that? It's in his hands to decide that. And if he hadn't decided that, everybody on death row would not be in danger now being executed. You are leaving in the hands of individual people this godlike power to decide to go for death or not. In fact, from square one, no DA ever has to go for death. It's their decision from square one to go for death. They always have the possibility of plea bargaining with people. And if they plead guilty, they're put in prison for life, which we got to work on too. But first of all, look at that raw, naked power of individuals like your attorney general to decide to get people killed. And he's following the example of Trump, who in the last 6 months of office decided that 13 people were going to be executed, and he did it. There was no way to stop him. It had been 17 years and there had been no executions, federal executions. He decides to kill people. He sends in Attorney General Will Barr, and they do it. They kill those people. So look how the system's set up. So, we grow up with, saying, well, the law is the sacred thing. And if it's the law, it must be right. And Supreme Court. But boy, you get into it. And it is a very human thing. And it is a very, very broken thing. And it was ill-conceived from the beginning that we could take on this power of life over death. We never have to kill anybody in this country. I'll tell you a little bit here about my dialogue with the Catholic Church. It's 1,500 years of dialogue in my Catholic Church, where that led finally to August of 2018, where Pope Francis changed the teaching of the Catechism. And the dialogue all along, when I wrote to that first man on death row in New Orleans, Patrick Sonnier, and began to visit him and then was with him for his execution, I had the hierarchy of the church against me, not just simply against me. The Archbishop of New Orleans, Philip M. Hannon, who had been in the military, was all for the death penalty. And when you have an archbishop that's for the death penalty, it silences all the other Louisiana bishops who did not dare get into the thing the media would pick up, that there was controversy in the church. Far be it from there ever being the controversial aspect of church members. We got to keep it all clean on the outside, the great image and all that. And so I'm going and being with people who are executed, and here's the Archbishop standing for the death penalty. And I got to tell you, churches do not have a good track record when it comes to picking up the issues of poor people and controversial issues. You just think of how many times you've been inside Methodist worship and you've actually heard a pastor get into the weeds on something like the death penalty with the congregation, because it means you can't just simply preach about it. You're going to have to really be engaged with your congregation in a conversion, in a journey of conversion, to dig into it and to understand it. So the way the dialogue happened in the Catholic Church is the same way dialogue happens in your church. And it's the way the Holy Spirit works in us, in the people of God. We, the lay people, are we the people who are not the hierarchy most often are the ones going into the prisons, or the ones setting up those adult formation groups where you begin to dig into stuff about how to really live our faith. It's the people of God that often are the prime movers in changing consciousness and changing conscience by lived experience on the ground with real people suffering. And that's the way it happens. That's the way it's happened in the Catholic Church. Here I am. I accompanied 6 people to execution. I'll just say at this point, I get involved. When I came out of the execution chamber for the first time, after Pat Sonnier was executed right after midnight, It was in the early morning hours of April the 5th, 1984, and I'd known the man for 2.5 years. I never dreamed when I wrote that first letter that he was going to be executed. I want to say one little warning word, a little alert about Jesus. You got to watch that Jesus, because Jesus is sneaky. I mean, I just want to tell you, I'm a witness to the sneakiness of Jesus. I thought when I wrote that first letter, I was only going to be writing letters. I didn't dream that that person that I was writing the letters to 2.5 years later was going to be electrocuted to death in the Louisiana killing chamber, and that I was going to be there. Are you kidding me? I don't know if I could have said yes. But I mean, God takes us gently, step by step. I'm calling Jesus sneaky, but it's also the gentleness of the Holy Spirit. And that's the way we actually grow in a very organic way in our spiritual life. We take a step, and that step leads us. And that step leads us also into a community of people, because you don't do it alone. You're not going to last. Lone Rangers don't last 50 seconds in the quest for human rights and social change. You might make a little flash on the hill, and then you're gone. There's no sustaining the energy. There's no sustaining the hope. You just get overwhelmed and you fade. And I had witnessed that man dying, though. I had watched that premeditated step-by-step protocol in which an alive human being was taken and step-by-step put to death. And I told him that, look at me from that chair, and you look at my face, and I will be the face of Christ for you. And I was so strong. I was there for him. And God is present there at that moment. And he did look at my face. And mine was the last face he saw. I wanted it to be a face of Christ, a face of love, and that he had a dignity as a person that no one could take from him. And that Christ was there in that room. And he would be received into God's arms. The experiences bring you there. And then what our eyes see and what our hearts feel. And I came out and I was changed forever. I mean, the first thing was, I'm never going back there. But then that didn't last long. The need was too great. The lawyers going in, taking clients. They weren't saving themselves. And they, come on, Helen, come in here with us. We have a client in Louisiana. He has nobody. Would you be a spirit? Would you be on our team? And so how could I say no to these lawyers who weren't preserving themselves from the fire? How could I? And so I did. And that has led to this journey over these years. And I'm going to tell you what, when we are doing God's will, when our boat is in the current of something big, much bigger than us, but yet we get to play our little part in it, like a personal presence of dignity and love to people, where they get 1,000 signals a day when they wake up in the morning that they are nothing more than disposable human waste. And when that strikes our heart and we feel it, we are there and we follow and we go then where it leads us. And that's what happened to me. So when I came out of that execution chamber that night, I threw up. I mean, that was the first thing I did. I vomited. It was the middle of the night. And then it really became clear to me, this is like a secret ritual. There are only a few witnesses behind the prison walls. There have been 2 court cases to try to make executions public. They've been defeated. It's by design that they're kept behind those prison walls. What the eye does not see, the heart cannot feel. We're not going to make it public. You want to keep it in place. You want to keep the people at a distance. Oh, yeah, look at the terrible crime he did. Stay with that. Stay with that terrible crime. And that's why it's morally proportionate to do to him what he did to his victim. That's the argument. Moral proportionate. They killed, they are killed. Look at the suffering of that victim. And then they throw into it, and we're doing it for the victim's family. This is going to give closure to victims' families. The average wait in Louisiana for a victim's family from a time a person is sentenced to death to execution is 17.5 years. What kind of closure is that for people in grief and in trauma? And they wait. And what is it that's being offered them? They are going to be given a front row seat and get to watch as the state kills the one who killed their loved one, and they watch that violence, and that's supposed to heal them. Look at it for what it is. Shoot through the political rhetoric of how it's used, claiming that they're doing it for the victim's family. When New Jersey in 2011 did away with the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families testified before the legislative hearings, don't kill for us. The death penalty re-victimizes us. We wait and wait and wait for this justice that never happens. Don't kill for us. And we have to expose it for what it is. Because people who are going to seek death want to legitimize it. And God knows how they use religion to do it. In the Louisiana killing chamber, before a man walks through this doorway into the execution chamber, to the left, painted on the wall, is Elijah going up to heaven in a chariot of fire. They look, there goes Elijah going up to heaven in a chariot of fire. And they are walking through a doorway where they're going to be bolted down into a wooden chair and killed with electricity. And they are going with fire too. Why is that painting on a wall? And what message does it carry? We're just playing our role now. You broke the law, and this is the consequences of the law. And I even hear people say, and by dying for your sins, and this assures you that you can go and you can be in paradise, but you got to pay for it. Where is that? How did it come to be so deeply ingrained in us that punishment is the way to respond when evil has been done? Where did we get this? Look at it. And the more you start looking at it, and you just see Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, punishment. Exile from the garden, punishment. Do a crime, exile to prison, separated from family. Where did we get it? It's deep in us. And we claim to be Christian. And then when you look even in the New Testament, you can always quote the Bible selectively. Do you know we had a legislative hearing. There was a repeal bill introduced in Louisiana. The head of the District Attorneys Association came before that judicial committee. It was never going to get out of that committee. And he sealed it for sure. And he came in to make his argument as the district attorney, head of the district attorneys of Louisiana. I'm not armed with legal briefs. All he said was, Jesus said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. These people have lived by the sword and killed people, they die by the sword. Simple equation, argument over. Because there is such a lack in our country of biblical literacy, of religious discernment. I mean, it is just, the more we're looking around us now at these mega churches, and now the whole use of just the political rallies that are now singing worship hymns. Look at it. So religion has been so co-opted, and Jesus is unrecognizable. Read that book, Jesus and John Wayne. Want to see how everything is just that violence is the answer and force is the answer, and you send in John Wayne. That's a great book to look at. And it's in our churches, it's not that we so much are rabidly seeking violence. It's just the passivity. There was a poll in the mid-'80s that said the more people went to church, this is Christians, the more they believed in the death penalty. Misinterpreting the crucifixion of Jesus. Well, he was executed by the Romans, and the execution, he paid for our sins, and that's what saved us. How does the execution of a human being pay for anybody's sins? What does salvation mean? What does that mean? And we don't do deep thinking. And that's why to belong to a faith group and to dig into stuff, to understand it and to see its meaning. And then it's called to us to move in there, to be an active force in our society, to create change. There was a senator in Wyoming 2 years ago. They were one vote away from repealing the death penalty in Wyoming. They only got a few people on death row. They hardly ever use it anyway. They one vote away from repealing the death penalty. And she says, no, I can't vote to repeal the death penalty. If Jesus had not been executed by the Romans, we would not be saved from our sins. We can hear the call. And first is to deepen our own faith and to make meaning out of our faith. There's some great books on Jesus. Marcus Borg, Meeting Jesus for the First Time. John Dominic Crossan's work on the whole socioeconomic of what was going on in first century Palestine. Jesus Before Christianity by Albert Nolan. The Jesus as he was and what he did. The purity laws, where the Jewish hierarchy and the people in charge, it was all the rules of purity. And it was all about separating you from the impure. It was all about division and separation. And Jesus shot through that. And it was compassion that drove him, not who's clean and unclean, who's hurting and who's not hurting. And then having table fellowship with people, that was the big no-no. You're mixing it up with the unwashed and the unclean and with sinners. He eats with sinners. And we got to ask ourselves, who are we mixing it up with? Who's the ones always around our table? How do we mix it up? So anyway, coming to understand the death penalty. And so what I did, I didn't know what to do. I was overwhelmed when I came out of that execution chamber. That was in 1984. And what I began to do then is just go and speak. Just let me tell you what happened to me. And I soon learned how you have to shape the journey when you want to take people with you into the issue of the death penalty. I soon learned that. And I had a great editor, or you never would have heard of this book, Dead Man Walking. The interdependence in which we live. If I had not had Jason Epstein at Random House to help me shape the story in Dead Man Walking, the book you never would have heard of, there never would have been a film, and there would not be an opera of Dead Man Walking, which is going to be performed at the New York Met during 2023. It's all in how you shape the story and how you take people with you on a journey. And I am sure you have experienced it. Oh, we went to the prison and we got to meet the death row inmates. Wow, they're really human beings. Oh, yeah? They all claim to be innocent, right? You got to take people with you. And what Jason helped me see and the way he helped me shape this book, in the first draft that I sent to him, he said, you wait far too long to talk about the crime. You are so into the human rights of this man, Patrick Sonnier, and his brother. What did they do? And your reader's going to be looking for that. Now, if you don't have that crime in the first 10 pages of your book, and you yourself are in abhorrence of it and outraged by it, and they don't sense that in you, they're not going to read your book. And what was the crime? The killing in cold blood of 2 innocent teenage kids, and the girl was raped. Patrick Sonnier, whom I met as a human being, and he was a human being. Everybody is worth more than the worst thing they've ever done. Nobody should be tortured and killed. Nobody. But the reader, when you're going to take them with you, what do they do? What's the crime? And what prosecutors try to do, and when you look at the arguments of people like Justice Scalia on the death, he harbors on the crime. Look at the crime, because what they're really trying to argue for is moral equivalency. Just look at the horror of this crime. Prosecutors do it all the time. Look at the horror of the crime. And we want to have death penalty in our toolbox to be able to deal with these people, not everybody. Only the worst that do these really terrible crimes. We want to have it in our toolbox. And what position did the Catholic Church finally come to after 1,500 years of dialogue? August 2018, the Catholic Catechism was changed to say, no matter how grievous a crime, you can never turn over to state authorities the power to take life. We need to keep society safe, and that's what prisons are for. There are about 195 nations in the United Nations. The vast majority, 2/3 of the nations of the world, no longer have the death penalty. Why? Why? Because we have a way to keep society safe. And they have given up this thing of moral equivalency. We must do to them what they did to their victim. I mean, imagine if we applied that to rape every Friday in prison. Here comes the rape squad. We're going to rape you because you raped your victim. You killed, we kill you. That's not who we are. We have evolved in many ways morally. And that's one of the issues too, where we have evolved. Because, and all along the way, as the Catholic bishops were putting out their statements, I was noticing they kept upholding the right of the state to take life. But we got to give the state the right to take life. Now, that has a long tradition of when times in history where there were no prisons and you had no way to contain violent people, that then violence against violent people to contain them was upheld. But it changed when we got prisons. And see, and that's the beauty of the Holy Spirit working in us, is that we can evolve and we can change. Look at our own lives. Look how we have evolved, and look how we change and are still changing. And then we can work to change things. How do you change things in Arizona? How do you get the people of Arizona to understand that you can never turn it over to the Attorney General of the state to be killing these people? You embark with the people. It's just like you do adult education in your church, you do it with the people of Arizona. And you got a lot of good tools there to help you. I mean, the film of Dead Man Walking is an excellent film. It takes you to both sides of the issue. It's not an anti-death penalty film per se. It's not an innocent person, Matthew Poncelet, composite of the two people in my book, Dead Man Walking. And he doesn't admit what he did, and the whole thing. And then, but he grows, he evolves, and the audience does too. And Tim Robbins, once he was talking to film students at DePaul University in Chicago, one of the kids just said to him, Mr. Robbins, what do you mean? What does it take to be a bold, courageous filmmaker? And he said, well, I'll tell you my moment in making Dead Man Walking. He said, everybody on the editing committee wanted me to do a certain thing, and I couldn't do it. And it was that you witnessed the journey of Matthew Poncelet gradually coming to acknowledge what he did and to ask forgiveness of the victim's family before he's executed. And then you are left with him on the execution in the gurney, being lethally injected. And then you also see the aerial view in the woods that night, Matthew Poncelet participating in the rape and murder of the victims. And everybody on the editing committee was saying to Tim, look, you got the audience with you because, look, Matthew Poncelet's finally reached a point where he's acknowledged what he's done. He's asked for forgiveness. Stop the film there. Don't show the murder again. And Tim said, I don't want to have the audience. And then he takes you in these two contrasting scenes. There you see the crime again. There you see the horror of it. There he is on the gurney being executed. There it is. Where are we as a society? And what are we going to do in response? The theater managers told Tim that when it was shown in the theaters, everybody stayed riveted to their seat till the screen went blank and they filed out in silence. And Tim, one of the first things he explained to me, when you're going to make a film out of a book, you want to get the core of the struggle that's going to be in that audience, that's in your reader, that's in all of us, about the death penalty, that anger about the crime and want to see him get what he deserves, that kind of thing. He's explained the difference the difference between art and propaganda. Propaganda is, he says, I'm against the death penalty in every DNA molecule of my body. Art is, you're going to bring your audience over to both sides. You're not going to preach at them about what they ought to think. And there's a lot of ways you can preach in a film. The way you arrange things, the crime was early on, it's faded in the minds of the people. And now it's only sympathy for the person being executed and his mom. And you just want to bring it there before your audience in its full power of both sides and let them work it out. And that film is still having that power. I did a Zoom about 3 weeks ago with a high school class in Paris, France, that had just looked at the film at Demewoc. Because death penalty is a human rights issue. And when you look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3, everyone, simply by being a person, has an inalienable, can't be alienated from your right to life. Inalienable. You can't take it out of the person. So governments don't give rights for good behavior, and they can't take a human right away for bad behavior. Inalienable. So, and therefore, you can never give over to state governments the right to take life. Well, it took the Catholic Church in evolution 1,500 years to reach that point, but we reached it. And it's understanding the power of the gospel of Jesus, that whatever those rules of separation are in society, about immigrants, of Black people, of gay people, of transgendered people, that we can shoot through those with that heart of compassion, to feel with people, that is a human being, and not to turn over to the state the right to take their life. Is the death penalty torture? Good question. Is it torture? Well, people say, look at that. They just go to sleep. You lethally inject them. Compare that to what they did to their victim, where they stabbed them 40 times. They bled to death, and looks like a pretty decent death to me. That's what Justice Scalia said. Pretty decent death, I'd say, next to what they did to their victim. Is that what the criteria is? What people do in the worst acts of their life to kill people? Lethal injection is a mess. The Supreme Court is allowing states to experiment with killing people. They're allowing them to experiment, go into these compounding pharmacies and just mixing drugs together. See, well, maybe this will do the trick. Because the main anesthetic that they used in executions, the European company that manufactured that drug found out that their drug was being used for executions, and they pulled it off the market. And now there's been massive experimentation. And you've had your own share in Arizona with Joseph Wood and what happened. To kill a human being and to say you're going to do it humanely. How could it ever be humane? Everybody I have accompanied on death row always has the same nightmare, because they are conscious, imaginative human beings. And when you are conscious and imaginative, you can anticipate what is going to happen to you. Everybody has the same nightmare, and it is, well, the guards are coming. It's my time. They're coming into my cell. They're dragging me out. I'm screaming, I'm kicking, no. And all of a sudden, I wake up and I look around. It was a dream. I'm in my cell. Or people like Joseph Odell in this book about the death of innocence. And you see how broken the system is, that no matter all the good evidence you have at trial, and you can't get it out there to the jury because the prosecution is blocking it. And so I used to think, oh, well, they got the appeals courts. Whatever didn't come out in the trial, they can just present at the appeals courts. And then they can give them another chance, look at the evidence, check out the DNA, do all the stuff that wasn't done at trial. Wrong. It's just like in those parking places where those treadles come up behind you. thin little slots of what you can present on appeal. And you're going to see Joseph Odell killed in the state of Virginia because he couldn't get that DNA evidence. He couldn't get it in because they said, too late, should have done it earlier. Your time's run out. Procedural bars, they call it. It blocks you from getting your evidence. Also in this book is the direct dialogue I had with Pope John Paul about the death penalty and asking him to help the Catholic Church. I said, I talked to a lot of Catholics and they say they're pro-life. Then the longer I talk to them, the more I find out, they're against aborting life. They're pro-life for innocent life. But they're all for the death penalty. And I said, can you help our church understand the dignity, not just of innocent life, but guilty life? And you could read it in here. But Pope John Paul, my image of it is he's the one who set up the volleyball right over the net for Pope Francis to knock over the net when he changed the catechism, because he did the groundwork. And when he was in St. Louis, it was in 1999, he was the first Pope ever to put the death penalty in with other pro-life issues. And he said, no to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted assistance, and no to the death penalty, which is cruel. He acknowledged that it's an act of cruelty. Our 9 people on the Supreme Court cannot look at the 8th Amendment, that you will not have cruel punishment, and see the sentencing of a human being and putting him in a cage for 20 years and taking him out and killing him as an act of cruelty. What blinds us? What keeps us from seeing? And Pope John Paul said it out loud. And then he added, for the first time we heard it out loud, I think he had been in the United States 3 or 4 other times. We kept trying to get to him. We include the death penalty when you talk about moral issues. They never would mention the death penalty. And then he added there, in St. Louis is where this happened. And even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. That's that inalienable right to life, that inalienable right of the dignity of the person. So those are a few little openers to share with you. And we got plenty to talk about. And I very much want to hear your questions and your insights. And we can tackle anything you want. I got your questions here if you want me to go by this, or do you want to make this spontaneous? And let's just see what's on your minds. What do you think, Patty?
Well, we got a couple of really good ones that we thought during the process of you speaking.
Good.
And so I thought we'd like to start with those. From Sabrina, she's on our committee. She said she really appreciated and needed to hear that we are not forgetting or overlooking the victims and their families when we oppose the death penalty. And she said, lives are forever altered when murder happens for all of us, the guilty and the innocent. And she did,
Sabrina.
Yeah, and she said the upcoming execution in Arizona that's supposed to be in June, the victim was an 8-year-old child, and we expect that will be a really hard one. And she just wanted your thoughts on that.
Whether it's an 8-year-old child, an 80-year-old woman, whoever it is horrible.
Yep.
But his actions do not determine our actions. Mm-hmm. And you know what victims' family really need that I've found out meeting them over all these years? All the millions of dollars that Arizona's sinking into killing this Frank Atwood person is they need healing, they need therapy, they need unemployment because they lose their jobs, they need to hold a family together, they need all kinds of healing help. And if we would divert all that money to helping them heal, then you're doing something real there. And I mean, once you single out something like a horrible crime, like Buddy killed an 8-year-old girl. Well, look, name anybody that gets killed and how horrible it is. But we're talking about us. Talking about our response.
This is from Dot Sanders, and this is a whole nother area. Who or what industries profit from the death penalty? The reason this one is interesting is because we do have a lot of private prisons here, and we don't like that, to put it mildly.
The ones who profit from the death penalty the most in political currency are politicians. When the Supreme Court put the death penalty back, you heard politicians running for office on law and order and being tough on crime. Biden was the first presidential candidate we had that said he would not support the death penalty. Obama supported the death penalty for certain crimes. It has been like a third rail for politicians. You don't dare say that you're against the death penalty. Political currency, it is politics that drives the death penalty to this day. The other thing of who gains, who profits, you look at the whole penal system. It is based on slavery, where you got cheap labor or free labor. If you look at the 13th Amendment, it said slavery shall be abolished except for those incarcerated. So you're beginning pay at Angola when you go and you're working in the fields is 2.5 cents an hour. They don't really have to pay you anything. They're indentured servants, or they're the equivalent of slave labor. And so private prisons just exacerbate that, where they make money hand over fist. Still, with the securest phone networks that get set up in the prison, our warden gets a cut of that. And these families that don't have any money, these expensive phone calls, they make money left and right off of prisoners. So that's part of the corruption of this, over the suffering of people, and see, it all stems from they're not human the way we are. They're paying for what they did, and they ought to be able to suffer. That's what it all stems from. Okay, who's next?
Some supporters of the death penalty believe that a sentence of life without parole is not enough for someone who has taken a life. So they're looking for equal.
Look at this. I mean, just look at that question. It could never be enough.
Yeah.
A victim's family I knew whose daughter was murdered, coming from victims' families who are in grief and trauma, and you can understand it more.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, my daughter's in the ground, buried forever. And even if he goes for the rest of his life, he can still talk to his mother. He can get birthday cards. He's alive and she's dead, and that's wrong. I want to see him dead. I won't be happy till he's dead. And that's that mentality. That's that thinking. So he's alive, no matter how much a human being has suffered. And when you absolutize thinking like that, he's got to die. It's not very porous. I mean, you can't get much understanding or compassion in there because he's got to die. And oftentimes, some victims' families begin there, but it doesn't mean they end there. Overwhelmingly, there's a difference I have found in African-American families who have already suffered so much in their life and know well not to trust over the life and death questions over to the justice system. They don't expect justice when it happens. We started a murder victims family support group called Survive, mainly made up of African-American women. And all of them said, she had 2 sons murdered, and it wasn't even deeply investigated by the DA of New Orleans. What do Black lives matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
White lives matter when it comes to murder. Black lives don't matter. Well, that's what those Black people do. That's what they do. Police report, little in his notebook, coming from a murder scene in the projects. NON, nigger on nigger. Another one killing another one. That's what they do. And
Wow.
when you've been protected in an environment of privilege all of our lives like this, to break through this, to really enter into it, to take a real journey of conversion for us. But anyway, that's what that mentality is. How much would you want to see him suffer?
Yeah.
Or you even hear people saying, put him in a cell and let him look at the picture of the victim, and he never gets out of his cell. He has to look at a picture of that victim and just suffer the rest of his life.
Yeah. We have a question from Marie. Marie.
Thank you, sister. In a spirit of Christian love, what do we say to our Christian brothers and sisters who really, really believe in what the Old Testament says about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? What do we say to them?
Oh, that's the quotable quote. Almost. I had a whole audience one time. I said, now, what's the favorite biblical quote to support the death penalty? And all said in chorus, an eye for an eye. First of all, dig into that context in which that was said in the Old Testament. Because when somebody in one village would go do something really bad to somebody in another village, they would come and they would wipe out the whole village. So the whole idea behind the eye for eye in the Old Testament was to contain the violence. One person was killed, you don't kill the whole village. Somebody knocks your eye out, you don't blind them completely. You take one eye, trying to do containment on the violence. Because you remember now, this is primitive society without prisons or without alternative ways for things. And then tell your friend, ask your friend who believes in an eye for an eye, and just say, well, do you believe in Jesus? Or are you Jewish? Or the Old Testament is pretty much what what about Jesus? And then, Jesus said, you have heard it said.
Right.
But I say to you, because what was Jesus about? It was about forgiveness. And it was about moving past that, not letting that hurt that has happened to change you so that you become hateful, you become vengeful, you want to see people hurt, because then you lose in your life too when that happens. And so then to explore what Jesus said. I'll give you an example. The hero in Dead Man Walking is the father of the boy, David LeBlanc, who was murdered by Patrick Saunier and his brother. And his journey I put in Dead Man Walking. And I don't give a talk in this nation without holding up the father, Lloyd LeBlanc. His starting point was, he's in the morgue. He's identifying his very alive boy that he loved so much. He's gone to a football game. He's murdered. He's in the morgue looking at his son. And he said, the prayer that rose out of me was, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And when he came to the words in the Our Father, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. He said, sister, I said the words, but I didn't feel the words. I was so angry at what they did in killing our boy, and I almost lost my wife from grief. All I could think of was extinguishing their lives with my bare hand. But he began, and he kept praying, Jesus, you got to help me. I know this is not what you want me to be, but he couldn't feel it. He wasn't there. The anger, and you got to go on that journey of those feelings, that anger, that everything, you can't shortchange that. Say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Go right to the forgiveness. That's what God wants you to do. We can't shortchange grief and trauma and anger and loss. You can't shortchange it. You got to go through the journey of it. And he did. And then he came to a point, and the way he described it to me was, he said, I was losing who I was. I've always been a kind person. I love to help people. And I was angry all the time. I'm snapping at my wife and making her cry. I'm angry. I'm consumed with this anger, what I want to do to these guys. And at one point, and then he held out his hand like this. And he said to me, then I said, they killed my boy. but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. And he helped me understand, if you look at that word, forgive, it means to give before. For, F-O-R-E, for, before, give. You give before, which means with God's grace and with a loving community, we do not let the hatred and the evil take over us so that we become a hateful, angry, revengeful person and we lose our life in the process. There's this saying, a Native American proverb that says, the one who seeks to go on the journey of revenge should first dig 2 graves. Anger in the beginning's good, I think. I mean, it's just aggression gets you going, adrenaline gets you going so that you don't collapse in on yourself and commit suicide. But if it stays in us and it controls us, it eats us alive. And that's the wisdom in Jesus. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye. But I say to you, how could he tell us to love your enemies? How could he tell us, pray for those who persecute? If we are praying for people who have hurt us, it means that within our souls is God's living grace, that we are such a loving being. We have not been overcome and paralyzed by the hatred.
Isn't it still true that it's much more expensive to kill someone than it is for the life sentence?
No, it's hugely important. You know, at first when we got into all this economics, and I noticed when I was doing media interviews, they always separated. The moral issues were over here and the economics was over here in the cost. Martin Luther King said the most moral document you ever look at is a budget. And when Arizona is spending millions and millions of dollars on this capital punishment system, you're not putting your taxpayer dollars into healing victims and at-risk kids and education and healthcare. And it's terribly expensive. And it sounds counterintuitive that it would be more expensive, but everything about capital punishment from step 1 to the end involves more costs. There are 2 trials, not just one. The sentencing trial can last as long or longer. You got to build a special section of your prison. You got to hire special, and then you have the appeals, and it goes on, and the cost is exorbitant. Just check it out, and you're right. And it cost us morally and a lot more. But when you're making an argument to repeal the death penalty to fiscal conservatives, just say, is this how you want to spend the taxpayer? And look at all this time in between executions. You're not really serious about doing it. Put it in where it counts, where it can really help the people. Good question. Glad you got it in there, Paul.
How about
Yeah.
how about Karen Spencer Barnes?
Karen Spencer Barnes, what you got?
Thank you for all that you've shared with us tonight, sister. The question that I have has to do with the local church, because earlier I heard you say that we have been brainwashed by our culture, which I agree with completely. So how do we in the church retrain the brain to make a difference, to make an actual difference in people's lives? What are the little ways we can begin to do that?
Can I ask, Karen, don't you belong to a small group of people that really study and dig into your faith and then see where it leads you to action?
Yes.
That's the kind of community Jesus talked about, and that's the kind of community in your local church there as well. There's no way that you go, well, let's just go send all the ministers to the training school so they all get it. Jesus talked about leaven in dough. Jesus talked about wheat and weed springing up together. Jesus talked about a local community of loving people in a community that begin to work for change. And see, this really brings forth from us a deep faith of trusting in the fullness of God to bring things to change. I've been working to end the death penalty for close to 40 years. And when you know what you're working for, because you have a deep experience in your own life of feeling the pain, feeling the compassion, understanding what's wrong with the system, then it gives you an energy and a bond in a community of people to work for change around you. What kind of activities in your local church goes on where you can recognize it as the activities of Jesus? And what does it call you to do?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like that. I don't see any more hands right now.
Patty, I know Khalil Rashdan has a statement that he'd like to make. And
Oh,
Khalil, if you would please just give Sister a tiny bit of your background so she understands.
Good evening, Sister Helen.
Hey.
My name is Khalil Rashdan. I am someone who was directly impacted by incarceration, and at one point in time, I was charged with a first degree, what they call felony murder. So, it was kind of like a hair away from possibly being sent to death row. So these issues are near and dear to me. I served 15 and a half years of that life sentence before my case was finally overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct and vindictiveness.
Wow.
And upon my release from prison, I got back on the front line and decided to be an advocate, not just against death penalty, but also other reforms that need to happen with our criminal legal system, because the sense of justice is not there. I just wanted, first off, I wanted to acknowledge the work that you've been doing for the last 40 years. And, this is one of the most unpopular topics in society. However, it's always great to see people advocating, against the barbaric nature of the death penalty. So, one of the statements I wanted to make real quick was the fact that, I've always acknowledged victims and the harm that is done to communities. But at the same time that we condemn a person for committing a murder, we also accept the same state-sanctioned murders, and the barbaric nature of these murders. And the other part of it is there's a big misconception and false narrative that sentencing somebody to death or executing somebody leads to justice for the victims. And in instances where victims said they're not with someone being executed and they just would rather that person spend life in prison, the state decided to move away from the victim's wishes in those impact statements. So, we're looking at revenge, we're looking at retribution. And when you have that revenge and retribution, there is no room for a person to, redeem themselves.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that real quick, and thank you for the work you do.
Wow,
And I
it's your
appreciate
voice.
everyone being here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for who you are and what you do.
do you have time for one more, sister?
Sure.
Okay, can we go with Dottie, please?
Okay.
Yeah.
I see you.
Hello, sister. Thank you so much for sharing today. The question I have, or maybe asking for you to develop further the comment that you said, Jesus is sneaky. And I was just thinking, I'm a pastor of a local church, and I was just thinking about what are some of the ways Jesus can be sneaky in our church situations, in our church communities, where we don't expect God to lead us in this place or direction that we're going in. So I just wondered if you could expound on that, that phrase, Jesus is sneaky.
Well, the most I could do, the main thing I could do is just talk about how I think I'm only going to be writing letters and I end up in an execution chamber. I mean, there are a lot of ways it can work in our life in a local church. Like, hey, join this committee. This committee does really good work, and you get in it, and there's this lady with this terrible personality who dominates the committee, and you want to kill the lady. And I mean, we get into the weeds in these human situations, and we led to these places where I didn't know this was going to be so hard. I didn't know I was going to have to deal with this person. Or even better, all you got to do is just look around and in your own life. So here you are, a local pastor, right?
Mhm.
You had any surprises? Jesus throw you any curves?
A few. A few. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the surprises are always waiting for us. It's never quite what we expect. But that we're working with human beings, here's my mantra, that I'm asking for the grace to see me through with people.
Mhm.
That person who's saying these outrageous things to me right now, with what she has experienced or he in their life, and what she knows at this point in her life, she's doing the best she can.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'll leave her there, but I have compassion that she's, and I just think of all the years when I was not awake to justice, when I was not awake, and it gives me a feeling of compassion and deep patience to accompany people and be with people, just as I would want people to accompany me, and who did in fact accompany me in all my years of not being awake to the connection of justice.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you so
I
much.
bet you're a good pastor. I bet you're a good Dottie.
I try.
I feel like we need to let you go, but I don't want you to go. So,
Look, let me tell you about it if you want to do this. This is
Yes.
an open invitation.
mhm.
If a group, it's got to be at least 12 people, okay?
Mhm.
Want to read River of Fire, take notes on it. I have journal prompts and things to go with it.
Mhm.
Read it. And then after you read the book, and I'll join you for a Zoom to share in a conversation, because this is my journey. And you might find some points of entry that it's like your journey as well. And so I just want to offer that could be in the fall or whenever it'd be good. But it's wonderful to be with all of you. You got to know how wonderful it is to be with people who are really searching and, digging into things to come to understanding. And it's really helpful for me to be with you too. So anyway, I just want to offer you that. It's River Fire. You get the audio book too, read in my own Southern inimitable voice.
Awesome.
Or read it, and then we can meet with your book group.
Yeah. Done. Okay.
All right. Because
Thank
I
you.
hate to leave you too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for coming to this session.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.